And it was 2 days ago, on February 7th, 2024, that I finished Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This video is a little late because I am sick. I'm actually more sick today, but for some reason my voice is fine right now. Don't know why. But because I've been sick and busy, so a little bit of a delay. But I did finish this 2 days ago. In the middle of the day, really. And it was definitely an interesting read. So with that said, we're just going to get into non-spoilers. And I have a mental list of the things we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about genre. Then we're going to talk about the characters. Then we're going to talk about the world building, which is one of the key points in the non-spoilers. We'll talk about the structure. And then we'll talk about the side characters and the LGBT themes. And we'll go into spoilers. Spoilers is just going to be a handful of specific scenes, and that's pretty much it. This is a short book. This is about the length of a Dresden Files book, is how I would describe it. I read it in 2 to 3 days with school, so pretty fast. So I don't have too much to say compared to, Sanderson, which was an hour, 15-minute video. So anyway, we'll hop into 9 spoilers, starting with the genre. Now, we're starting with the genre because that's the main distinguishing factor between this book and most other books I read. This is a LGBT romance sci-fi book. Now, I haven't read many very specific LGBT books. I guess you could count Spear and Gideon the Ninth as the 2 I have read that are like explicitly marked as LGBT genre. Doesn't mean I haven't read books where that comes up, but those are books where it's labeled as a genre. And those books do it differently. This is the first one where it's a romance kind of thing. So this feels very different to me, and I could notice pretty much like in the very first chapters I was like, this definitely reads different than what I'm used to reading. And that's technically fine. This is technically the first romance I've read. Technically, I read one in high school for a book club. I actually do have a book review of that somewhere. I don't think is the key word. I don't think I posted that publicly on the YouTube channel because I was a little judgmental of it because it was romance. So then I was like, I feel this is a little too harsh, and if I recall correctly, I took it down because of that. So technically, this is the first romance book I chose to read myself. And I don't know. I wouldn't say I had a bad reaction. That would be lying. But I wouldn't say I had a good reaction either. This was, overall, my reaction wasn't like oh, I'm going to read more of these. My reaction was more like, I think jury's still out? Like, that was more so how I feel overall about the genre. Not necessarily about the story, though we'll get into that later, but like just about the genre and theme itself. I don't know. I feel like I can bounce back and forth a bit. So it might just be a we'll see in the future kind of thing. I was definitely looking forward to this book. And again, I'm not going to say that I'm disappointed because that's a bit extreme, but I'm not like fulfilled either. So that's overall how I'm feeling. It definitely has a decent amount of sci-fi, but I think it's very regional. Like certain sections of the book are very romance heavy, and certain sections of the book are very sci-fi heavy, and it's kind of like going back and forth. And a lot of the parts I do like are the sci-fi bit, to be fair. But there were definitely some romance parts I liked as well. So, again, there is a balance throughout this book. So it jumps back and forth. One of the funny things about this book going into it was that I saw that people on the internet were arguing, like, it's too romance-y to be sci-fi, and it's too sci-fi to be romance. And I was like, huh? And now that I've read it, I kind of see both sides. It's, again, because it's very regional, it feels strongly one way or the other, and then it's not. So, interesting. I would say that's an interesting factor. Now, just going to characters, since I feel like that kind of segues. There's two main characters because it's a gay romance. First, we'll talk about Kiam, the main character. I would argue, at least. I really liked Kiam. Kiam really grew on me throughout the story. At first, I was like, okay, he's definitely like a personality. But he very quickly grew on me within like the first few chapters. And I think Kiam is kind of like the static character of the two. Like, he's round, don't get me wrong, but he's not round in his chapters. He's round against his backstory, I would say, personally. So he is kind of one of the more static of the characters in many ways. And yeah, I really liked Kiam overall. He gave me a good impression. I'm going to juxtapose that with Jinin. Now, I don't have problems with Jinin, for the record. I like many aspects of Jinin as a character. But I think that he wasn't on page enough, or described enough, or insert words here enough, for him to really stick out as a character to me. Like, obviously he's a main character and he's very important, so I'm not saying that I forgot about him, but I'm saying that he felt less real. He felt less like a person I know kind of thing. If you ever read a story and feel you personally know the character, I didn't get that in the case of Jinin. I feel in the case of Jinin, he was more just like a vague person to me. I still feel, even after finishing the book, that I know very little about him as a person compared to Kiam. Kiam always tells you, the reader, everything about him. Jinin is a very quiet-minded person, but throughout the book he becomes less quiet-minded, but you still kind of know nothing about him. So I think that's the main thing about him, is there's that weird, he's round in that he starts to open up, but even though he opens up, you don't really learn anything more. So I feel a little weird with his story arc, but again, I don't think it's even that it's the story arc itself. I think it's just that the book is short and we get less than a month of these two. So I think we just don't know Jinin well because we haven't seen him long enough. That's my take, personally. And one of the main things on the back of the book is talking about like Jinin's past. And the thing about that, which leads into the storytelling aspect that I was talking about, the thing about Jinin's past is that there's no hints to it, really, until it comes up. And so, plot-wise, the author didn't really foreshadow things heavily, and would kind of just give you these details about Jinin, like, on the go. And I think that is also a contributing factor to my, like, weird feelings towards him. The author, Everina Maxwell, right? Yeah, Everina Maxwell, just tended to tell you things as they came up. There were some foreshadows, but a lot of the things that were foreshadowed in the story were generally smaller things, like little like hints towards stuff, but never like big things to prepare you that something was going to come up. Which again that's a story style writing kind of thing. You can definitely write stories without giving any foreshadows if you would like. But I think it makes it a little jarring when a bunch of sci-fi things come up. So throughout the story, there's a lot of connections between a lot of different bodies going on, and there's backstory and world building describing those bodies like in some general capacities, but never explaining it in a way where you can start to draw conclusions or start to like theorize things. A main example, for instance, would be like Jinin's planet's culture. The author will tell you the things you need to know about the culture for the plot, but I feel pretty consistently throughout the story, it's never explained. And so you can't ever make any like assumptions or conclusions or any associations even with Jain's culture and any of the stuff going on because you don't really know much about it. There's like little tidbits, but they don't give you insight into the actual beliefs or anything like that. So that's just an example, but I would say that that's true with a lot of different things throughout this book. Um, and so sometimes when things do come up, again, it can feel a little jarring because it's like, well, there was no preparation for this, so I guess I'm going to learn this now. And that's the other thing too. As a reader who has read many of fantasy and sci-fi stories, I felt so torn between developing this new planet but also thinking that it might be Earth. I I made it a decent way through the book before realizing that no, it is not Earth. But it's still, there's no actual like description of the planet. And so I don't know what it is like or what it looks like. The author uses a lot of Earth-like words to describe a lot of the things going on. Mountains, valleys, bears, doves. But none of those things are actually what they are like. And so I have so many like mixed, I have a lot of confusion about what am I supposed to be processing this world as. And also, curiously, I want to know why it's called Winter's Orbit. It is winter, like season, but I recently read The Left-Handed Darkness, and The Left-Handed Darkness, the planet was called Winter because that planet was ice cold. It was winter. It was permanent winter. Like the human beings were made to live in that weather. There's a little theme about Kiam's people being more able to survive the weather, but not in some serious capacity that says a lot about the world or the people or why biologically they are that way. So, again, I think that is one of my biggest things regarding this book is just, I think I personally would like more world building or just more like a smoother pattern to it. If the author like changed the order that the world building happened, I think I actually would have been content with it. But it just felt weird through me. It felt weird to me throughout the story, to the point that I was telling my roommates and my friends about it. That I was like, this is a weird way to do this, and that's kind of what I took away with it. What I took away from it. I can't do English today. Alright, so that covers world building, that covers the story pattern, that covers... We talked about the LGBT themes in it. It's a gay marriage, but it's never... Sexuality is definitely never described as a minority in this story, and I love the way that it's actually never, like, defined. Because it's never defined, it tells you that the world itself already accepted it, and I do like that. The closest it ever gets to being very explicit about sexuality is one scene where Jainin is like, Kiam prefers women. Statistically. Like, just based on news articles, Kiam has been with more women. And that was it. It seems like pretty much everyone is like fluid and makes no assumptions or anything like that throughout the story. And I do really like that and respect that. But even more representative than that, not saying that that's not representative, but even more representative is gender in this story. I think gender in this world is very fascinating because rather than having it be like a physical body part indicator or voice or anything like that, the indicators of gender in this society are what you're wearing. But not even what you are wearing. You can still dress masculine or feminine. It is a matter of what stone you are wearing. So there's like three, I don't remember which are which. I know one is onyx, one is like a jewel like thing, one is wood, I think. I might be wrong, but there are these three things that you wear, and depending on which you wear, that determines what pronouns people use for you. And it's kind of an open system in a way, because you can have he, him, they, them, and she, her, which are all evident in the story. But if you were, say, gender fluid, you would, like, just change which one you are wearing. Or, if you're agender, you'd wear none of them. So, it's pretty... I kind of like the system, honestly, and the way it is delivered in the story is very smooth, especially when the first non-binary character comes up. It is so smooth. It's they the author just uses they them pronouns for the character. Like there's no talk about it. There's nothing weird about it. It's not even brought up in the discussion. I think Kiam notes, oh, this person's wearing like this kind of stone. Okay, that means that they have they them pronouns, and just uses they them pronouns throughout the scene. So I do greatly appreciate that, and I think that's some great representation, and it's very smooth. So I did love that about this book. Anything else? World building. Oh, plot. There's one more thing I was gonna say about the plot. The author definitely had plot twists and had some very sudden things coming on, and generally the author wanted you to not actually have a feel of how the story's gonna go, and I do appreciate that. And a lot of those twists were what like really got me interested throughout the story, particularly halfway through when the first one happened. I was like, oh, and then there was like a whole cascade of them later on, like especially towards the end. The end had like a whole cascade of those events where you weren't entirely sure what was going to happen, and in some ways that was like super fulfilling, and in other ways sometimes it was like, is this actually going to go bad, or is this going to end up like the super happy fluffy kind of way? And there's always that balance, and that's part of the thing about me reading a romance book, is by default I'm going to assume that it's going to have the fluffy ending. So it was a little hard at times to believe that the characters would get harmed because of that. It's kind of like psychology of reading kind of thing. So that is the last thing I would mention in that regard. There were a lot of like very sudden things, and some moments where I was like, oh, this is actually going to be a thing. Whether or not it was, you would have to find out and read the book. But definitely something I noticed. I also didn't know that the second book in this series is a standalone. I didn't know that these are both standalones, not separate books, or not two books in a series. So I thought that there was going to be another book built on this book. Turns out it's a different couple, different things going on. Did not know that, but that did mislead me a bit in thinking that there was going to be some plot in this that would come up again in the future. Alright. With all that said, I think I'll just jump into spoilers. I just have a handful of scenes I want to specifically talk about. Some of them a little picky. Just a little, I promise. Just a small bit. And then some just general things. So, this is your time to leave. This is spoiler time. I should have got more water. Okay. So, spoilers. Count Jinan's previous partner died at the start of the book. Now, I think there's a lot of awkwardness at the start of the book because it's a forced marriage with, what, a few days notice? 1 day notice? I think it's something like a day notice. It's a forced marriage, and so it makes sense to have a bit of awkwardness in the first day, especially with someone like Kiam. Kiam just is a little clumsy and silly, and I love him. Don't get me wrong, I do. But it makes sense that there's going to be some clumsiness in the first bit of the book. However, I still, even after reading the book, I still have mixed feelings about using Count Jinan's like grieving, which Kiam assumes he is grieving, as a source of awkwardness. I think it comes across to me in a very mixed way, especially when Count Jinan gets upset. Like, it's very clear that Count Jinan like struggles with his emotions and struggles with understanding his role and situation and stuff like that because of his previous relationship. But because you don't know that until very late in the book, like very late in the book, like almost the end of the book, because you don't know that, that beginning sequence when Count Jinan kind of gets upset at Kiyum for assuming that he's grieving, or just completely is not understanding of it and shows no emotion regarding the fact that his partner died, really, is a bit crazy to me. And some of the awkwardness they have in the first few chapters is due to that. And that was probably like the thing that made me feel very wary about the book, especially in the first part. I was very much like, I don't know how I feel about this. Not necessarily because it's like a red flag, but just because it was part of what wasn't selling me on the character of Jinan. He was just so kind of detached from the situation all the time that he didn't really develop into a standout character to me. But the author could have delivered that in a way where he did stand out and didn't have emotional commitment to stuff. Like, that is definitely possible. I've seen authors do that. I think just something about the delivery of Jinan in the first section didn't do that. I'm not a writer. I'm an engineer, so I don't know how to word this, but it definitely would have been possible to sell me on that idea. But it felt like he kept like switching or being uncertain on things in a pattern that wasn't explained. Maybe that's a way to word it, but I just felt a little weird about all of that in the first section of the book. I definitely had to pause a lot throughout the first time when them sleeping together came up. I was like, okay, this doesn't sound great. This sounds a little worrying. And it turns out it was worrying, and Kiyum was like, we need to stop. Which I'm glad that Kiyum did. This book definitely made consent a main theme in it, and I do respect that. So that's a lot of my first impression of the start of the book, is that there's a lot of that going on. It's a lot about their relationship and what they're navigating through it. And then it tosses us into the plot line of getting Count Jinan like a security clearance because his got revoked. And that is one of the examples I have about like the world building. If it was clear what a security clearance was, who has it, is it like a if you work for the government kind of thing? Like, we don't know much about the relationship between Iskat and all the other planets at the start of the book. There isn't much development there because Kiyum doesn't know. And the author flat out says that Kiyum doesn't know those things. But he doesn't really learn them either. And so the idea of there's a security clearance, and Kiyum, who's one of like 70 plus princes, can just walk in and yell at security. It's a little weird to me. Also, Kiyum's relationship with the Emperor. Because there's so many princes, I kind of want more context or story explaining to me why Kiyum has the things he can do. Why Kiyum isn't punished for some of the things he's done and stuff like that. I kind of just want to know more about why things are the way they are. Because I feel it helped me better grasp what is going on and why the characters do what they do. So, again, those are just some of the feelings I have along the way. But, anyway, so we get tossed in that storyline and we meet the non-binary head of security. Already forgot their name, which is unfortunate. We meet Belle. I do love Belle. Belle is one of my favorite characters overall. I think Kiyum and Belle, probably my favorites. It's very interesting. We also never get any of Kiyum's backstory, really. His mom shows up at the end, but we don't really know anything about his mom. Like, the whole story. So, again, just things that occur to me as I was reading. Was like, man, I don't know much about this, or this, or this as we go. Count Jinan picks up a job. I think it's a job. That's the other thing, too. It's never cleared if he's paid or if he's volunteering. I think it's volunteering. So do they need jobs? Is there money? Is there money? I don't know. I don't know anything about the society, but he starts volunteering for this work for something called Kingfisher, and then like way later in the book, they talk about like what Kingfisher actually is. And I don't even mean like the reveal that it's a military operation. That's fine, but like literally the word Kingfisher and what it means, or what it could possibly be used for, is revealed so very late, and so much of the military is being bribed about it that, again, it was a hard sell for me. It was hard for me to grasp, like, okay, this massive section of the military is all doing this massive military operation without the Emperor knowing, even though there's internal security which has looked into this. Like, there were so many factors juggling around that it was hard for me to be like, this makes sense to me. It's hard for me to do that. Instead, I was just like, okay, the author says all these things are true, so I'm going to take it. And that was kind of how I was reading towards the end of the book, especially like the minefield and stuff like that. If there were minefield mentions like earlier in the book, then that would have helped me a lot. But the first minefield mention was when they first met the arbiter. Arbiter's the wrong word. The treaty spokesperson people. When they first met that person, that's when we first got the mention of the minefield and that it can control people's minds, which is pretty close, I would argue, to when it gets applied to Jinin. So that's just another example of a scene where I would have liked some like heads up or like hints or stuff like that earlier in the book. Setting that aside though, I want to talk about the middle of the book when they get in a plane crash on the way back. Well, plane crash. What was even called? A skybug? Sky bus? Sky... There's a thing. They rode the thing. It's kind of like a helicopter in my head, but again, it wasn't ever clear to me what it was. It was something that flew in the sky and has two wings that they can dip in the water. So, one of those. They crashed in one of those. And that was one of the scenes where I was like, ooh, I'm excited. I didn't think this was going to go this route, and I am so here for it. Someone just tried to kill them. Great. And I thought it was going to be like a kind of serious survival situation where they're going to have to figure out their communication and relationship along the way. And I was like, okay, I am down for this. They kind of did do those things. They spent a lot of it like apart and separated, which was a little weird to me. They did show some of the hiking talk and how they were kind of sarcastic, but it was kind of like a montage. So a little not what I was expecting in that regard. And as someone who lives in the state I live in, hikes a fair bit, skis a fair bit, glissades, climbs couloirs, does outdoorsy things, rock climbs, I definitely had some mixed feelings about them going down the valley and climbing down in the snow and falling and catching each other. That was the thing that caught me the most. I don't understand what happened in that sequence. I re-listened to it 3 times and read it physically once. I don't know what happened. Kiam somehow caught Jinin, who fell from a particular height while climbing. I fundamentally just don't understand what they did or how they did it, because they were supposed to be climbing down rock or snow or both. It just wasn't clear to me. And so I don't know if that was just a me just struggling a lot reading it thing, or if that is something that a lot of people were also just like, not entirely sure what's going on, but I'm just going to keep reading. So that sequence, I don't know, I had all these different feelings about it. And then the bear shows up, and they argue about what a bear is, but I feel the argument could have been done in a way where it revealed to the reader what was going on, rather than being like, a bear. It looks like a lizard, and it's on his hind legs. Threw me off on like one of the comments that Jinan has is that like bears usually have 4 legs, and so that made me think, wait, the lizard has 2 legs? But it turns out the lizard had 6 legs. It just never was clear that that's what was happening. So again, I just think the author's way of storytelling just doesn't tell you much of context. And I guess I'm a context-dependent reader. Or maybe it's just because I've been reading a lot of Sanderson, who gives you too much context. I don't know. But that's just a lot of what I was feeling throughout these sequences. It was less about, like, the relationship, because the relationship either, like, progressed very quickly or slowly. It would just switch between that. It wasn't even about the relationship or the plot. I would usually just be thinking about the situations they're in and trying to understand what was going on and how stuff got to that capacity. And then, like, freaking the general, or not even the general, someone. I think it's the general. No. Yes. Some military leader who's very important. After saving them, just like blows them off, really. Like, just ignores them and like says they're making claims for trying to be killed and whatnot. And it's such like a disorienting scene, because it's just like, well, obviously she's responsible. It turns out that she's mind controlled later, but we have had no hints that mind control is a big thing up until that point. And so that scene just comes across as her just being a jerk, or a liar, or both. And it doesn't have a follow-up until way later in the book. So again, if things were told in a different order, or things were connected more, I would feel happier. I don't have any problem with the actual storyline of what ended up happening, like what ended up being the truth. But I wish there were more red tie connections between the different things that happened. I'm gonna get off this soapbox because I've been on it for a while now, and just talk about a few final factors. I love that Jinan's staff training came around. That was a great foreshadow, and I like that it ended up applying. They did get me. The author got me with the like Tom being alive thing after the machine, the minefield. I part of me was just like, I guess Tom is alive, because the book never sold it to me that he was dead. Like, they said he was in a flybug crash, but I don't remember any particular scene where they mentioned an autopsy of the body or like a thorough search or anything like that. So I took it for granted, and then it turned out that, oh no, it was just another minefield trick, because kind of the main bad guy, there's kind of 2 main bad guys, really, arguably 3 if you include Tom on the list, but the guy ended up taking control of the machine, and Belle had to fight getting knocked out by the thing. That's the other thing. We didn't understand how guns worked until pretty much when they mattered. So, another thing I would like context on. But it doesn't matter. Just ignore that. Mind control machine was very interesting. I really had a point, a decent section, I would say, where I was wondering if Jinan was actually going to have either amnesia, which would have been interesting, or if he was just not going to believe Kiem, like, was going to believe Kiem was fake, but still get out of the machine, and then, like, have some, like, issues with reality or something like that. I assumed the worst in some of those capacities. It ended up being the best case scenario, where he didn't have any damage or anything like that. But I really did wonder for quite a bit if that was actually going to be a plot line. And again, I thought there was a second book, so I thought that would have led into the second book, so that's why I believed it. And then I realized that this was just the only book, and I was like, oh, that's why everything wraps up like very, very neatly with a nice little neat bow. And that's not really a problem, but I was considering those possibilities, and I got excited for those possibilities, Um, those did not happen. It was generally a the good guys win, woo, kind of thing. Um, and again, it isn't until like 2/3 of the book that we realize why it's so important for the good guys to win. So it's very interesting. I think there's a balance too, where the author could have been trying to go for a more like realistic telling based on the character's point of view, which is Kiem and Jinin. If Kiem and Jinin don't know things, then why would they explain things to you? I think that's a valid point of view to have. But I also think that it can take away some of the impact that stuff can have throughout the book as well. So I think it's an interesting balance. Overall, it's an interesting book. I am glad I read it. I do still love the cover, especially the back. I don't know why the back just looks gorgeous to me. It's the colors, I think. Don't know if I'll read the second one. Apparently the second one, the couple actually have the mind communication thing, which sounds very interesting. But I think it will be a while before I read something like this again. So, those are my overall takes. With all that said, we'll get into what's new and what's next and close this out. Oathbringer should be next. Exams start this week. I have 2 exams this week, in fact. So this week is going to be brutal. I won't have lab though, so that's the good thing, is I won't have lab. So I can probably start Oathbringer on Thursday or Wednesday night after my exam. I did get the audiobook of Oathbringer, so I can read it at home and listen to the audiobook on the bus, which is the best combo. So hopefully that means that Oathbringer will go a little bit faster. Don't know if that will happen, but hopefully. So we'll see. And then I'm trying to figure out what standalone I want to read with or after Oathbringer, because usually I do a standalone with stuff. I just want to show this off real quick. Oathbringer, exciting. And I'm not sure. I liked how short Winter's Orbit was, so I'm kind of tempted to choose another short book. I think I'm just going to shop around to see what audiobooks are available when I finish Oathbringer or reach a pause point in Oathbringer, and choose from there. Part of me kind of wants to try a Master of Jin. Part of me wants to wait. So, a lot of mixed feelings going on there. And I did reread Battleground, just randomly, the other day because homework was kicking my butt. And Battleground's still great. So, that's pretty much all I have to say about all that. I don't own any new books, but I do need to buy Rhythm of War soon. Especially if I'm starting Oathbringer. I need to buy Rhythm of War. So I think I am going to buy that copy. I found a website that sells UK editions not used. And again, I have no problem with used books. I own used books. But Sanderson, I might as well get the recently printed versions because they're all already looking this nice. And I don't want to have one that doesn't match the rest. So that's kind of how I'm going. With all that said, I'm going to go to bed because it is 1 a.m. So I hope you all have a good one. And I'll see you all whenever I finish Oathbringer. Or a side book. We'll see. Bye-bye.